Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, the 2025 Biennial Juried exhibition, juried by Deidre Hamler, Wendy Earle, and Charlotte Gordon. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist, Rachel Linnemann. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function to ask your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we are presenting from separate locations, there might be some variation of bandwidth, so if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right. Thank you, and welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Kat. Thank you so much. I just first want to say thank you for having me today. It's such an honor to present my work and to be showing my work alongside so many talented Ohio artists. I was truly flattered to just be in the show, let alone to be giving this talk today. It feels really special every time I can do an artist presentation just to share my history as an Appalachian artist. I feel like we're an underrepresented community, so it really means a lot. But let's get into it. Who am I? A bit about me. I'm Rachel Linnemann. Again, I'm from rural Appalachia. What you're looking at right now is an image of the family farm. My grandma currently lives on this farm. I did not grow up on the farm, but I spent a lot of time here. It's located in Bethel, Ohio, and it has been in our family since the Revolutionary War, which is pretty crazy to think about. So, a lot of really deep uh, family connections, lineage, and history here. And it's really become a large source of inspiration for my work. I do not live in Bethel anymore. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, about 40 minutes outside of Bethel. And I am an annualized adjunct professor for the University of Cincinnati. And at the University of Cincinnati, I teach both two dimensional courses and three-dimensional courses. So, intro to drawing, woodworking, you name it, I can do it. But before I entered the world of academia and received my master's from UC, I had a pretty big break from undergrad to grad school. And I primarily worked as an art handler, and I have about 15 years of industry experience under my belt. I was an art handler for the Cincinnati Art Museum, and that's where these images are from. So, just kind of a sneak peek into that world. The image on the left, that is me painting a permanent mount for a BCE lion head. The gallery was going through renovations, and we needed to color match the mount, and we thought it was safer to leave the object on the mount rather than remove it. I think this mount has since been removed, but it was so cool just working that closely with that object. The top middle image, this will come into play later. I have a deep love for portrait miniatures, and it was the first thing that really influenced my work in grad school. And this is me on my break, during my lunch break, looking at the portrait miniatures in the Cincinnati Art Museum's basement. On the top right, this is often what I would be doing in my spare time. I'd be creating earthquake proof boxes so an object wouldn't rattle off the shelf. This is an African artifact, and this kind of box would either hold the object on the shelf or go inside of a crate once it was being shipped. The bottom middle image is an installation shot while we were working with Chihuly glass pieces that needed to be suspended from the ceiling above the cafe. And this was a months long process of figuring out an appropriate mount and the lighting and the logistics of how to get these fragile pieces safe out of the kitchen's way, but also to where they wouldn't hurt the staff. It was really tricky and really rewarding. And then maybe my most fond memory, just because it was so random and fun, I got to climb up top of a Jim Dine sculpture and buff it with wax, and it was a lot of fun and just a big break from my day to day inside the basement of the museum. But this job really showed me how much I love craft and labor, and I really got to do all the things that I love to do with art in my hands, and I still really am influenced by my time as an art handler. But then I entered grad school, and my work has changed a lot since grad school. When I first entered the program, I was making work about trauma. The piece on the top left is from that series. And I had a pretty rigid way of thinking due to working in the museum world. I would get stuck in this loop where I kept thinking about display rather than actually just starting the piece. And then my mentor, Matt Lynch, he was like, hey, I think you need to play. And so now play is a huge part of my process. And I've kind of thrown out the window the idea of installation until the end, which is crazy. And I really just try to enjoy the experience of connecting with the objects. Um, but it started off working in bronze and then evolved into found objects. And so I think it's interesting that my work has gone from this kind of heavy, intense mood into this vibrant and playful medium. The first series that I made in grad school, I called it my Natural Defenses series. I actually submitted my application to grad school primarily with a painting portfolio. And I was hoping to find a way to combine my love of painting with sculpture. And so I was creating these little portrait miniature inspired bronze pieces. So I consider these to be a hybrid between flowers and brass knuckles, something meant to defend and something soft. Again, thinking of trauma and vulnerabilities and defenses and this desire to be soft and open and the struggles and dualities of that. And these are all colored pencil drawings with ink and acrylic on the inside of my own eye. And it was just thinking about perception and vulnerability and being seen and how scary that felt for me. Then that evolved into pure sculpture. I really fell in love with the foundry process. And again, I was thinking more about brass knuckles and flowers, but this piece really, I feel like, connects to my current body of work. It's in the shape of a serving platter. It has these looping forms. You'll notice throughout this presentation that I use circles a lot, and it's not something I really noticed right away. Someone pointed out to me once. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I do like circles. Um, and then the little spikes on the middle here are honey locust thorns, and I actually harvested those from the family farm. And the honey locust thorns I used as a symbol of invasive thoughts. Again, thinking of trauma, trying to release past thoughts and feelings. And honey locust trees are invasive to the family farm. They have to be removed, otherwise, they'll overtake the land. And so I was using them symbolically, thinking, I want to remove these thoughts, I want to remove this tension. And the brass knuckle forms became bigger and exaggerated, thinking about how useless these internal defenses I had up were. People could see right through them. They weren't serving me any good. And instead, I kind of resigned into becoming this platter that I was serving myself to others. So I think it's just interesting reflecting on this piece and how I'm now currently making a lot of food based work, platter based work, still talking about generational trauma in my work, but in a much more caring, lighthearted way, less aggressive. And then there was a big jump in my work. I went to grad school during COVID. So COVID hit and I lost my studio. I lost access to the foundry, and needless to say, I freaked out and I panicked, and I was like, what am I going to do? I had fully planned on fully making a body of work that was metal based and really labor intensive. But during COVID, I just could not handle making trauma based work. I needed joy. I needed to really just set that work aside and focus on finding happiness and peace. Everyone was struggling during that time. Everyone was afraid. We were all isolating. And so I was really thinking of home a lot, thinking of my grandma back home on the farm alone, and I was worried about her. And so I kept thinking about things that brought me joy back home. And I kept thinking of county fairs and the blue ribbon awards that would be given to a prize winning pig or a prize winning pie or flowers. And I really was craving that silly joy, that joy that was given, that award and celebration that was given just because there was an appreciation for this labor and care given to an item. And at that time, I was trying to find a new dialogue to make work about. And I was in my studio apartment, and I didn't have any of my, metal work around me, but I had discarded old projects. So I had this little wooden disc, I had my colored pencils, I had fiber, and the rope on the bottom of this sculpture here is actually from a previous project. And so I started this idea of reuse, and I was watching this documentary on Basquiat, and I just had such an appreciation for him as an artist and his struggles and just the way he was working. And so I decided to make a silly tribute to him. And this was purely for me. I didn't think this was going to be a part of my work at grad school at all. And I made it, and I was like, wow, this is weird, and I love it. And I feel like I've tapped into something. And I think I had that first moment of, oh, I've never brought my Appalachian identity into my work. And that still felt really scary. But that idea of the county ribbon that's mimicked here in the circular form around Basquiat's face just felt really, really significant. So this is boating rope at the bottom, um, ribbon around the portrait, acrylic paint, and then the portrait is on a wood panel. It has gold leaf, um, colored pencils, and acrylic paint. But again, I was thinking of home. I was reading a lot of news and consuming a lot of information, and I was pretty panicked about the state of the world and trying to make sense of it. And like so many people, my family was pretty invested in baking bread. And so we would go visit my grandma on the family farm in distance, and she quite literally would toss me a loaf of bread and I would catch it. We made sure to not be close to one another, but still spend quality time and show love and appreciation for each other. And when I visited her, and when I would talk with other family members who were still working during the pandemic, this is when that term essential worker was really big, I realized that Appalachians have experienced all of the hardships that people were experiencing during that time, including job loss, food insecurity. Blue collar labor was being praised, but a lot of labor was still being overlooked, and I was really struggling with that. And so I began interviewing hospital workers, their take on what was going on, other laborers, other people who were deemed essential workers. I kind of put a call out on my social media, and I was just talking to a bunch of different people, seeing how they felt about that phrase and seeing how their job had changed. And it really became the basis of my thesis in grad school, which was totally unexpected. But I decided to put into practice the lessons of gratitude that can be found during times of hardship that I learned from my Appalachian ancestors into my art practice, and really try to show joy and labor simultaneously in my work. And that became my new goal. Because during this time, I was really questioning who was being celebrated and who wasn't being celebrated, who was being deemed essential and who wasn't. And I noticed that Appalachian women were continually showing up for one another, checking in on one another and still showing a duality of roles, not only the stereotypical roles of maintaining the family, but tending the field, helping on the farm, helping in the garage. There was never a moment of rest, and I felt like that was really mimicked during the pandemic. Um, and just before I move on, I know people are probably curious, but that is my dog at the bottom there. And he also was such a huge help during the pandemic. That's Danny Boy, and then my grandma in the back, Grandma Betty. But these stories of hardship were never sugar coated, but they were always partnered with stories of how they got by, um, teaching the next generation how to be resourceful, how to be caring, and how to be generous and gritty during times of hardship. And I just felt like it was important for me to pass on that legacy of knowledge in my artwork. And so that led to this body of work in my master's. This piece is called Don't Forget to Clock Out. And I was, again, thinking of laborers that were overlooked or underrecognized. And this piece came about because I was talking with healthcare workers, and every single healthcare worker mentioned the janitorial staff and how grateful they were for the janitorial staff. And you didn't really hear that being talked about in the news. These people were getting paid a minimum wage, they were working overtime, they were putting themselves in very dangerous situations that they weren't prepared for. I mean, no one could have predicted what was happening globally during that time. And so I really wanted to honor them and pay a very simple, recognizable tribute. So I was trying to think of how can I do that? Found objects was new to me. It felt important, but I liked the idea of simple communication. And so I was like, okay, I need a recognizable object and I need a recognizable symbol of celebration. So I went for the iconic mop, nothing too fancy. And I went with a curling ribbon that you would use for party supplies. And I really enjoyed that it created this sudsy feel, like this mop had just been used and like it was hung up on the wall, like someone maybe stepped out for a break or answered a phone call, but they might be coming back to it momentarily. So again, just kind of this silent moment of recognition of labor. And this was at the Contemporary Arts Center here in Cincinnati for my thesis, and I actually had a janitorial staff member approach me, and they were really moved, and they had tears in their eyes, and they just thanked me. They're like, I often feel overlooked. You know, this isn't a space where I am the center of attention or the focus, and to feel recognized by you when you are presenting your work is truly meaningful. And so that was really, really special. This piece also has a companion piece called We Are the Champions. And this piece really changed my trajectory and gave a sense of validity to how I was making. But again, I was still thinking about, okay, what's an iconic object of labor that's associated with labor, an iconic symbol of celebration. And so this time I was thinking of the mop bucket and trophies that you receive just for competing in a sports activity. And what's interesting about this piece is it looks really simple, but I spent so much time cleaning this really crusty, dusty, used mop bucket. And it's something that I really enjoy about working with found objects is there's a lot of hidden labor that goes into it where I really have to connect with a piece in order to bring it back to life and to make it look simple. So we have these golden trophies emanating from a golden base. So the base has gold leaf and resin. And if you look closely, the sports memorabilia has been cut off of all of the trophies. So I was thinking about the aggressive stances that we all had during that times. I don't know if you remember like going to the grocery store and just trying to get out of other people's way, or you were walking on the sidewalk and someone, invaded your little bubble, and so you would cross to the other side of the sidewalk. But I think we are all navigating uncharted territories and really, had our guard up. And so I wanted to highlight the aggressive stances of the trophies, um, but kind of remove any sports element to it. Um, but I know not everyone is going to care about labor. Not everyone is going to care about class or who is being overlooked or underlooked. And so whenever I feel that way, I try to incorporate pop culture references. So the title "We Are the Champions" is referencing a Queen lyric and or a Queen song, and that song is all about celebration and victory. And I wanted the janitorial staff or any kind of laborer to feel victorious during that time for just simply going in, doing their job, and putting in the work, really. This piece won the Young Sculptors competition at Miami University, which I was very surprised and humbled and flattered by. The juror was Mark Dion, and the Young Sculptors competition comes with a $10,000 award. It was very shocking, and it led to a subsequent solo show. And this piece at the time, I remember thinking this work is either not going to get in at all or it's going to be something special. It felt like the weirdest thing I had ever made and the scariest thing I had ever made. It felt really good to make, but I've noticed that whenever I feel this intense insecurity about something I'm making, that I'm typically on the right track and I'm pushing myself into uncharted territory and tapping into something special. So this piece is really special to me and to the way I think about my work. Um, this is the largest piece that I made in grad school. This was a part of my thesis show. And just for scale, before I talk about it, when I'm standing next to it, I only come up to that third row of clocks on the bottom. Um, but at this point, I was fully addicted to found objects. And I won an auction for these clocks. There were 222 clocks, and they all came from an auction from a school. A school was updating their clocks and liquidating them. So they all came from this single area. And I was beginning to think about the language that an object held and really trying to be specific about what kind of objects I sourced and trying to think about the dialogue that objects created and what kind of dialogue could be made with an object. Um, and I really liked that when these were taken off the wall, you notice they all have a different time. And I wanted to keep the clock resting in the moment that it was removed from the wall. Like its time had been spent, and this is where it rested and where it ended in the time that it, clocked out, so to speak. Um, if it isn't obvious, this is in an abstracted shape of a bomb. Some people see a pocket watch, which I think also works, but I feel like COVID for me really felt like this big ticking time bomb. This also had a sound piece that went with it, and the sound piece was meant to feel kind of agitating. And the top clocks, the white clocks at the top of the bomb shape, those were all battery powered, and they were the only ones that were battery powered, so they still had a little bit of life left in them. So when I installed them, I let the batteries naturally run out. So you heard this really soft ticking, and then all of a sudden you didn't. Really thinking of the lives lost during the pandemic, those that were working during the pandemic, and just that weird time warp that I think we all experienced of, the days blending together, working virtually, and just kind of losing this sense of time and place. But I was really questioning, like, what are we doing with our lives? What is important, and what do we need? And a community just felt really important. So again, the title, "With the Time You Have Left," I wanted people to really question, like, what are you doing with your time? And then there is this little moment in here that is a Felix Gonzalez Torres tribute. If you're unfamiliar with his work, he has this really touching piece that is a tribute to his significant other, Ross, who passed away from AIDS, and the clocks are set at the exact same time. And so there is one section here where two clocks are at the exact same time next to each other. I don't remember where it's at, but I wanted to have just a little tribute, not only to him, but echo his sentiment of those that were really longing for their loved ones. I would love to show this piece again. I've had trouble finding areas that would accommodate a piece so big, but I would really love to reconfigure this into a new shape and let the idea of time really speak in a new way. Um, I don't know. I just was really, I loved that this felt like an iconic symbol of not only school, but I feel like you see these clocks in industrial settings, work settings, and they just have such an iconic feel. And I love that each clock has its own sense of history. You can tell they're from different eras, bought at different times. I don't know. I just think they're so special. But I also just wanted, before I move on, um, talk about the labor involved in this. I had to clean every single clock. I had to install hardware on the back of each clock. Each clock back was different, so each hardware looked a little different. I had to do math for each and every clock to place it in the specific grid. I coordinated with my friend who's a architect to figure out a schematic like grid for myself to put it on the wall. There were laser levels involved, lots and lots of measuring, scissor lifts, and I had to label each clock. And then you see the cardboard boxes at the base of the scissor lift there. Those were all labeled and labeled by row and clock number. So it was pretty intense orchestrating this, but I'm really proud of it. And then this is the final piece that I made exiting my grad program. And this is where I really started to circle back to this idea of my Appalachian roots. I just kept coming back to that circle form. I mean, we saw it in the clocks, we're seeing it again now. And I revisited the blue ribbon that you see at the county fairs. And I had this sense that my work was starting to evolve beyond just labor, and labor specifically tied to the pandemic, but touching into blue collar labor and Appalachian labor that I hadn't really talked about in my thesis. Well, I did a little bit, but not a lot. This piece is made out of grocery bags, ribbon. It has a colored pencil drawing in the center that has a little bit of acrylic paint. And then it was my first time using what I call butterfly money. So it's a dollar bill shaped into a butterfly. And I'll talk about that first. So for me, you'll see this pop up in my work over and over again. And whenever I'm using butterfly money, I am using it as a symbol of food insecurity. Butterflies are fleeting, they are precious, and they have a very short lifespan. And if you are experiencing food insecurity, that dollar bill is not going to get you very far, but it's going to feel very important. I have experienced food insecurity in my life, and it's something that you don't really forget what that feels like. This piece feels really relevant today, unfortunately, and really important. And I think I'm probably going to be making some more pieces like this again. And then in the center of the form, we have a grocery bag and a Campbell soup can, a little Andy Warhol tribute there to the iconic soup can portraits that or silk screens that he's made. But also, you know, the type of food that would be readily available for SNAP benefits. And then the grocery bags, I actually cut the grocery bags and fuse them together with heat to make a fabric so I could actually pleat them in a fabric way so it was more stiff and rigid. So a lot of hidden layer went in, or hidden labor, excuse me, went into making this piece. But again, the title, Wait Until Payday. So that struggle of stretching your paycheck and really kind of trying to make ends meet. But this was the last piece in my thesis, so it was still also acknowledging those grocery workers who were having to work overtime, who were deemed essential workers, and also thinking of my friends who were servers or in the gig work industry who were really experiencing financial hardship. But after graduating and working towards my next solo show, I realized that I needed to revisit the labor and knowledge that was given to me from my Appalachian ancestors. And my work just kept pushing me back to my rural roots, and I kept making references to labor and celebration. And I realized I was even making stylistic choices that mimicked the members of my family. I had always avoided making work about being from Appalachia. It felt really uncomfortable. Um, I've always felt a little too country for the city and a little too city for the country, if that makes sense. But when I think of my time growing up, I think about this age. Here I am at the bottom here. My hair's a mess. I am dressed up, yet I have mud on my knee. I'm wearing a faux fur jacket. I'm missing my front teeth. My great aunt Ethel has her arm on me, steadying me, because me and my cousin Brandon, who's next to me, were causing all sorts of trouble before this photo was taken. Um, I really think of this just like pure time in my life where I was being really creative and exploring every inch of the farm and allowing life to be joyful and messy. This is my mom, my sister, my grandma. Notice the awesome costume jewelry that she's wearing, and my great grandma. All of the people here in this photo are significant. They are all laborers, educators, blue collar workers, all family members, and all just people who have really instilled this idea of hard work and knowledge and gratitude into me. So that takes me to my current artist statement. I'm going to take a sip of my tea really quick. This is a condensed version, but I'm a found objects artist, utilizing recognizable objects of labor and femininity to celebrate the intelligence and strength of her Appalachian ancestors. So again, I was starting to really hone in on specific objects and reflect on this new narrative of investigating my own past, of my family lineage, Appalachian history, and knowledge specific to that region. And this is kind of a little sneak peek of what's to come. This is a detail shot of another work of art that you'll see momentarily, but you'll see a lot of costume jewelry. You'll see a lot of lace, over exaggeration of stylistic choices, aprons. But really, I wanted to kind of embody what I was seeing my female family members wearing growing up. And it often was a very vibrant color palette like you would see here. But thinking of my family, it was also natural to come back to found objects. My entire life, I have seen evidence of objects being reused in unconventional ways. For example, this is a fence on the family farm, and this fence needed to be extended to separate the bull from the cattle. So this area did not exist, but they needed to find a way to separate that bull from the rest of the cattle. And so my grandpa, he made a fence out of scrap fencing, wagon wheels, and scrap metal. And he created something that was really beautiful out of these broken objects on the farm. And it just became this like really lovely moment of folk art, in my opinion. There's this room on the family farm in the workshop that is filled with discarded objects. And these objects are broken or they are extra parts, but they're not ever discarded because they still have potential for reuse. And so they are kept. There is this really strong notion of reusing materials out of really socioeconomic need, and also so you wouldn't have to go to the store. And if you understand the material that an object is made from, you can repurpose it and reuse it in a new way. So this became a huge part of how I was thinking about my work and how I was approaching found objects. But again, notice those circular forms. They keep popping up in the items that are influencing me and the work that I make. But just recently, when I was putting together this PowerPoint and looking for images of the farm, I've noticed that the color palette that I'm using in my sculptures is even reflected. And the color palette being from the farm is reflected in my work. So I'm mimicking the flowers that are planted, the weeds that are growing, the barbed wire on the farm, the rusty metal fences, the red barns that are all over the property, the bold patterns that my grandma is always wearing. And then on the bottom right, you see the inside of the barn where you see a lot of industrial items that are being stored. And then actually underneath the tarp in that image is where the clocks are currently being stored. And that metal bow on the wall is something I made as well. And I just needed a place to store it because it's like 6 feet tall. And it's made entirely out of aluminum flashing, and it's even reflecting the area. And funny enough, it's someone cut it apart to use the material. And so it's kind of giving back to the farm in this new, unexpected way. But the basics. Why found objects? I feel like I get asked this a lot. I feel like everyone can relate to them. It creates a dialogue and presents an opportunity to re examine something familiar. So everyone can look at a mug and know its purpose, its function. We could be from different walks of life, speak different languages, but if you can look at an object and recognize its form, that is a form of communication. Why do I change the object? I've been asked this as well. Again, I saw objects being used in unconventional ways growing up. This taught me to see purpose in something beyond the obvious. And then why visual joy? So why am I bringing celebration to an object? I want to make an object celebratory. I want to highlight those that are regularly using the object. And plus, it makes it a lot of fun for me. So that takes me to my influences. These are my holy grail. These are the people I'm constantly looking at when I feel stuck. First, we have David Hammonds on the top left. He is my favorite artist of all time. I would love to meet him. And his work is beneath him. This is my favorite work by him. It's called Untitled 2000. And he, I think, is just a master of visual puns, and his work revolves around class and hierarchies, but he often has this really smart sense of humor that is associated with his work. And his work looks really luscious and rich, even if it's a really simplified form. And then second in command, maybe actually she might be first actually, is Dolly Parton. I often think, what would Dolly do? I really love this quote by her where she said something along the lines of, I could be less, but I like being more. I think she just has this Appalachian integrity, this Appalachian grit, opulence, and kindness that she just uses every day in her everyday life. And she has this ability to laugh at herself and market what others looked down on her for to her advantage. I think Appalachians are often deemed, poor or unintelligent, or tacky. And she's like, sure, why not? And kind of uses this as the platform for herself. And she's like, yeah, I like being tacky. I like being over the top. And she's such a powerhouse, and no one can deny that. I have really struggled to find Appalachian artists to find it as a source of inspiration that have not been deemed folk artists. And I've really struggled with that. And so I really come back to her and her aesthetic as a source of inspiration, but also just the way that she carries herself. I really admire that as well. And then I'm also looking at and reading a lot about Judy Chicago, who is the first person on the bottom right. She is a feminist artist. She is asking for a seat at the table, or not asking, demanding. She uses vibrant colors. She's a female sculptor. She is addressing sexism and worth and identity. And I think she's just a really powerful voice for any female sculptor to look to. And then Nick Cave on the bottom right. He's most well known for his sound suits, but I really love his circular forms that you see in the background there. They are so luscious and full of texture and inviting. And I actually met him when I was 19 working as a security guard at the Cincinnati Art Museum, and he really changed. Just changed. It sounds silly, but I feel like he changed my life. He was so kind and inviting, and he really had no he had no need to like be as nice as he was to me and give me the time of day. And it was really special meeting him. But I love how he categorizes his objects and his use of labor and craft and gender stereotypes. And he also, um, makes work about class as well and just his own personal struggles. And I just relate to his work a lot. So, shortly after creating We Are the Champions, I made Significant Grit, which we see here. I was thinking of the stressful roles parents were having to step into during lockdown. They were working virtually while watching their children learn virtually. Everyone had dual roles, and this was something that I felt like was mimicked with the Appalachian women growing up. The apron was actually used and made by my great aunt Ethel. I thought of the struggles the women in my family have faced, how they regularly canned food for the winter. They were teachers, they were mothers, they were farmers, they were seamstresses, they were gritty, they were strong women. And it felt natural to use a pearl as a symbol for this, to signify this strength. And I think it's important to note that a pearl is formed because it was originally an irritant inside of a mollusk, but it evolves into something beautiful, much like the extra time that families had during the pandemic and that they were getting to spend together. So it was something like that was really challenging, but ultimately pretty beautiful if you think about it. But I've realized after making this work, I have this weird need to prove my own labor to myself. So that little video maybe showed how tedious this was to sew all of those pearls on. I actually had to smash off a row of the pearls in order to get enough string to sew it. I had to hand sew in a wire base so the apron could support the weight of the pearls, hand forge a loop that would support the weight of the apron and the pearls, and then weld a base for it. I, after grad school, had a residency at the Contemporary Arts Center. I was forced to spend part of it at home because COVID had spiked again, but I felt drawn back to the apron form. It felt like this iconic symbol of femininity, but I wanted it to represent more than that. If you wear an apron, it's protecting your clothing. It is a form of protection. And so I began looking at other uniforms or other things that were celebrated in a way that was different than an apron. And so I was looking at decorated military uniforms, and the awards typically reside on one side over the heart, but instead I wanted the, what I'm calling awards, to rest over the pocket, the useful portion of the apron, so that it could kind of pay honor to the wearer and pay tribute to the wearer. And if you notice, I'm working in my dining room. I do not have a studio. I haven't had a studio since grad school. So I have to have all of my materials very meticulously organized in these little IKEA bins. And then it quickly turns into this explosion of materials on the table that I then have to clean up. But I'm very comfortable working in small spaces, and I haven't really found it to be limiting. As long as I can hide the visual joy out of sight when I need a break. That takes me to this piece, All That You'll Let Me Be. This is a No Doubt lyric from the song I'm Just a Girl. And this piece is a tribute to Dolly Parton and how she's talked about her experiences in the industry of people not thinking, telling her she wouldn't make it as a country music star for her looks or for being a woman. And her basically saying, hey, like, I can be whatever I want to be. But again, not everyone will care about class or femininity or Appalachia. And so this is where I feel like it's important to bring in these pop culture references, especially on these pieces. Um, the materials in this, it's suspended on a curtain hanger. So again, another domestic item. It has a lot of crystals, freshwater pearls that were hand sewn in, an actual butterfly that is encased in resin, a lot of hand sewn elements, handkerchiefs, and costume jewelry. I was again thinking about labor and why is it special to me? Why do I care so much about labor? But it's often done as an act of love and care, and those are the moments that I feel like aren't celebrated enough. And so I was thinking about the quilts that were made in my family and how they were made as an act of love, to keep someone warm. And these patchwork quilts in particular, they are made from scrap fabric that was once made out of items of clothing. So one act of care turned into another act of care. And I am not necessarily a seamstress. And so I was thinking of how I could do this in my own practice. And so I collected cans in my community and I cleaned them up and I cut them down and I made a patchwork quilt out of the items that I collected in along the streets of Cincinnati. So I wanted to show that act of care for my community. This piece is called Oh You Pretty Things. It's a David Bowie lyric, but again, it's similar to the apron work. It's talking about food insecurity, acknowledging the women in my family. It's talking about classism, this love of food, how food brings us all together, but it's also this really important source of knowledge. Like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you pass on this knowledge to the next generation? And again, the women in my family were always wearing this overabundance of costume jewelry. Oh, sorry. This piece, Drip Drip, it actually tells my grandma's story. This top part is an industrial milk strainer, and she actually used this as a child. And in order to have milk, she had to quite literally milk the family cow, and they would use this strainer. And so the reward was the milk, the reward was the labor. And so in this piece, I wanted to really show the reward coming from the strainer by adding these chandelier crystals emanating from it, literally referencing that abundance of labor and really honor her time that she spent using this object. Community engagement has become a huge part of my practice. Making sculptures can be really lonely, and I wanted a way to connect and show people that we have more in common than what might meets the eye. And so the way that I do this, I bring them into my artistic practice. I present them with objects that they can select. They select an object. They then say why they selected the object, and they answer a specific prompt that I am presenting them with. And I then document their response, and I document their object, as you see on the cards on the table. And then I take their objects and I assemble them into a new form. And so it really becomes this community pie, this archive of stories that someone can then read someone else's story, find the image of the object that they find inspiring, and then find it in the sculpture and learn more about a community member. This is an image from my most recent solo show, Butterflies on Barbed Wire, that was at the Sculpture Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was awarded one of the winning artists for the Revealed Early Career Artist Series. And this piece was largely focusing on generational knowledge and generational trauma. But it was really, I was thinking about what kind of knowledge do I want to keep and what do I want to leave behind? What is serving me and what do I need to let go and move on from? This piece here is currently on view at the Clifton Cultural Arts Center, and it will be up until December 12th. And this piece is about violence against women, specifically in my family, and them overcoming that violence and really becoming this strong, caring woman. So the red form in the center of the apron, if you were to wear it, it would be resting right over your womb. So I wanted to think of that red center as both a womb and a wound. And then it's dripping jewels and butterflies from that wound. So butterflies actually eat decay. So I wanted to think of it as healing this past wound, healing this past trauma. But I also wanted it to, again, be that form of protection. So that apron protecting this person and acknowledging their strength through the size of the piece and acknowledge the way that they carry themselves by making it a really kind of beautiful, soft, welcoming piece to look at. I again was looking more at the county fair bows, but they've become more abstracted, less rigid and defined in that circular form. The piece on the left, simply titled Blue Collar, is highlighting blue collar workers, but I wanted to incorporate costume jewelry because not every blue collar worker is male, and there are so many different people in that industry that I think kind of get overlooked or undervalued. And then the piece on the right is actually a self-portrait titled "You Are Worthy." And if you notice, the tractor gears are at the back of this piece, and the jewelry is at the front. Really thinking about how I tried to cover up my Appalachian history for many years, and I just really wasn't comfortable with it. And then the piece that's actually in the gallery in Columbus at the Rife Gallery, this piece is called Bittersweet. This piece is about food insecurity. It's about labor and emotional labor and the physical labor of providing a meal for your family, but it's also about opulence. So the cutlery is chrome, nickel, steel cutlery that is then 24 karat gold plated. So it's quite expensive cutlery. And then again, we have that butterfly money, that symbol of food insecurity. I wanted this piece to feel like an animal trap, something that could close on to the viewer if they were to grab the cake slice. Baking has always been a really big deal in my family, and stories I've heard from my mother's childhood, she often mentioned a lot of hardship, but there was always this decadence with food. So thinking of how you might be struggling, but there is still this like sweet reward that is happening simultaneously. But again, that precarious nature of facing food insecurity, and how do you overcome that fear of how do you relate to food? And then the cake tin is actually an object from the farm that was found in that room I described earlier, where objects kind of rest until they can be turned into something new or reimagined. My work is starting to change, largely because I'm limited on time as a professor. And so whenever I do a demo for my students, I try to also make it um, reflect my work. So both of these pieces were demonstrations that I used in the classroom, but they are a part of my practice. So these are made out of Bondo, and Bondo, if you're not familiar with it, it's used to repair cars. So I really like its tie to blue collar labor. On the left, the piece is simply titled Corn. It's really just acknowledging the fact that my family has farmed corn, hay, and soybeans for generations. And then on the right, my mom always has a really lovely strawberry garden. So it's really simple work, acknowledging, again, food and labor. It is a mold making process that is very labor intensive. Um, the corn was a two-part mold. The strawberry was a four-part mold. So on the far right, you see the bottom two sections of the mold that I then had to then cast the Bondo in and attach to the top part of the strawberry. And then that bottom center image is just kind of funny. I work in a very chaotic way in a very small space. And so I just really wanted to show the realities of working in a small space and the realities of being a found objects artist, and how organized you have to be and how chaotic it can be. The strawberry is also a baby rattle, so I'm about to play a video and hopefully it'll make a noise for you, but I often feel When I look at the world and there's so much going on, I'm faced with this struggle of like, why cry about it? Okay, you faced food insecurity, move on. So I wanted to make just a giant baby rattle for myself. So I made these epoxy beads that are inside the strawberry. And it was really exciting to make something tactile and that created noise. That's something new for me. These are also current works that I'm making that were a part of my demos for my students. I'm currently teaching a woodworking class at UC. And so my students are doing this process where they model something out of clay and then they slice the clay into layers like you see in the middle section. And then they trace those layers onto a wooden board and then cut out the slices on a bandsaw, laminate them back together, and they're creating an abstract wooden form that is all about ergonomics and tactility. But I'm making a bunch of heirloom tomatoes. So, again, thinking about my love for food and the knowledge that's passed down, I like that duality of the word heirloom. And this is all because I'm working so hard on my demos to make the best use of my time because I have an upcoming solo show at the University of Northern Colorado. The title is Grit and Gristle, and it's running from February 2nd to March 6th. And it is in the Oak Room at the university, which I'm really excited about because the Oak Room that you see here is actually an old dining hall. So I'm really excited to have a food based show in this space where people once gathered and ate, and it feels just like so incredibly special. But that is all I have for you. At the bottom here is my website and my Instagram. If you wanted to reach out and ask questions or connect or even like send me some found objects, people do that all the time. Feel free to reach out to me, but I would love to answer any questions if you have them.
Great. We are pretty close on time, so we have time for just a couple.
Sure.
We have a question from Sierra who asked if you are aware of any other artists or creative types in your family lineage.
Yeah, so my great aunt Jeannie, she used to make her own quilts and create her own quilt patterns. I learned woodworking from my grandpa Ronnie. He didn't consider himself an artist, but he had a wagon building and restoration business. My grandpa Don taught me how to paint. My great aunt Jeannie also did watercolors. Everyone considered it a craft or a hobby. My mom makes jewelry. Yeah, there's a really extensive line of working with your hands in a creative way, but no one ever pursued it.
That's wonderful. So I think I'd like to close out with a question, um, asking you to perhaps shed some light on how you have moved past your inhibitions around making work that delve into your lineage. For
Yeah.
those that are perhaps dipping their toe into that, what is
Yeah.
your advice?
Allow it to be uncomfortable. Allow yourself to make some work that just doesn't feel right and move on from it. Um, Talk to your family members if you have family members that you're close to and try to get their perspective on it. Sometimes I would talk to my dad and see how he interpreted something before I even told him what it was about. And I thought that was a really helpful perspective and kind of got me out of the art bubble. But if you're not close with your family, just really try to find joy in the process and release yourself of that pressure that it has to be perfect and just right. And if you can really just allow yourself to play with materials while thinking about your family and whatever you're trying to convey, it will naturally come out. You just have to like let go of that resistance.
That's wonderful. Thank you again so much,
Yeah.
Rachel, for the
Thank
generosity of your
you.
time and your
Yeah.
talent. Thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Rachel Linnemann as a part of our programming for the 2025 Biennial Juried Exhibition. A special thank you to our jurors, as well as the other participating artists, the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.